I'm now joined by the co-founder and editor-at-large of Recode, the host of the podcast Pivot, and contributing opinion writer for the New York Times, Kara Swisher.
It's
Always
me.
a pleasure. So
Here
excited
I
to
am.
see you.
Recode.
Yeah, you got your Recode shirt on. Now,
Yeah.
I did see over the past couple of days on Twitter, though I was on a brief, mostly a Twitter hiatus, I did see that you were posting some pretty wild early haircuts, and I just want to applaud you for the
Thank
courage
you.
that took. Let's start by talking about TikTok. So Trump says he's going to ban TikTok. Now we find out that Microsoft is in negotiations to acquire TikTok. Trump's now saying, oh, they have till September 15th, or I will use some unspecified power to ban TikTok. What's happening?
Well, everything was okay, and they've been in talks to do this. There's been a lot of pressure about TikTok, whether it should go public and become a U.S. company or someone should buy it because of the concerns around its security because of China. They're valid concerns, not the most valid considering all the other issues with China. But, Trump has zeroed in on TikTok for reasons unknown. And focused on the idea that American teens are unsafe because China is sucking up all this data about them, or whoever's the 100 million people using it. It leaves out the fact that most of our phones are made in China. A lot of our technology equipment is made in China. China is making incursions militarily, technologically, with 5G, with algorithms, with facial surveillance. But let's focus on TikTok. That's really pretty much. And in doing so, he also screwed up the deal because there were ongoing talks between Microsoft and ByteDance, which is the owner, is Beijing-based owner, to buy TikTok with Microsoft, and then he jumped in here and started to say ban, and nobody really knows, and it screwed up the whole talks. And then Microsoft pulled out, sort of, or said we're going to wait until we get clarity from the White House. They talked over the weekend when cooler heads prevailed to remove Trump from the equation, and Peter Navarro must have been standing behind him, yelling at him in some fashion. And I guess Steve Mnuchin and Lindsey Graham and Marco Rubio got involved and said, this is a good outcome. This is going to be bad if you look like you're attacking the TikTokers. And then they're in talks again. And so they have till September 15th to talk. And then Microsoft had to write a hostage letter to Trump saying how great he is. Otherwise, that was...
So... you wrote a piece about TikTok that I think captured my own ambivalence about it, which is that it's a really fun, interesting, creative space. Then on the other hand, there are these legitimate privacy and security and surveillance questions. But a lot of that does seem twinged with sort of assumptions about what a Chinese company would do, while ignoring the actual reality of what American companies do through their apps every single day. Do you think the fears about TikTok specifically are founded? And do you think that those fears are answered by transferring ownership to Microsoft?
I think there's no proof that they are doing this. But that doesn't mean that they aren't doing it. I am much more concerned about China than I am about Facebook. I hate to say that, but the fact of the matter is it's Facebook selling or Amazon selling toilet paper or whatever. I'm very concerned about all these companies sucking up all this information, but I'm more concerned with the state government doing so always. That's always going to be the case. So it's not really comparable. It's not a comparable thing. I think what the issue is that do we want the next internet age to be dominated by the Chinese with the values they have? And as damaged as we are, the democratic values around the internet have been really great for the development of a lot of the internet, not all of it. And what's happened is that it's become this sort of monopolistic space now with a few, as you saw last week in the hearings. And so I'm concerned with two different things, and they're not the same. You can't say I'm unconcerned. I'm unconcerned with Facebook, but I'm really concerned about the Chinese. You have to be concerned about all of them, but for different reasons.
So let's talk about that hearing, because actually one of the arguments against efforts to regulate Apple, Facebook, Google, Amazon is if you break us up, if you hamstring us in any way, you're just sort of ceding the field to China. Let's talk about the hearing. You had these four big companies, and what I was realizing and just thinking about talking to you about this is these are four companies with incredibly different businesses, incredibly different goals, and incredibly different influences on the economy. What brings them together is that they're huge. That's really huge and powerful. So what did you learn from the hearing about, I guess, first of all, stepping back, tech generally, and then I think we can talk about the individual companies.
Yeah. Well, look, first of all, tech is not a monolith. And by the way, everyone's not concerned with China. It was Mark Zuckerberg talking about that because that's his argument, is that I have to be this big. look away from the Russia issues, look away from the hate issues. I need to be big in order to fight the Asian villains, essentially. And I think it's just a feint by Facebook, even if he's concerned. And there are issues around China, which is doing rather well in proliferating its technology around the world, and a big foe. So let's not take away from that. But I think it's a talking point for his PR. Like, look over here. It's either she or me. And that's what I call the she or me argument. And I'm like, I don't like either of you. Like, I don't like him more than I don't like you, but I don't like you that much. You know what I mean? It's really kind of a weird argument that he's making. But of course, it's a good one for him to make. And especially it was followed this weekend by this activity around TikTok. He aimed at TikTok, and TikTok aimed back at him too, by Kevin Mayer, the new American CEO. So I think each of them are individual. Let's start with that. It's not a monolith. There's issues around Apple's App Store, very different from the issues around Marketplace at Amazon, around whether buying and selling and controlling marketplaces, very different from search dominance at Google, YouTube hate speech and stuff like that, which is also owned by Alphabet, which also owns Google. Very different from hate speech and propaganda and allowing all kinds of lies to proliferate on Facebook and the dominance of social media. So every one of them has to have a different answer, right? And so that's what's difficult here. And the answers and the solutions and the way we fix these things are very different. Overall, there needs to be a privacy bill that's passed. This will affect all of them. Secondly, we have to look at each individual company, decide whether they should be allowed, say Amazon, should it be able to sell things? And there was some very incriminating, Jeff Bezos had to admit that they were using some third-party data. He said, I can't say it hasn't been violated, which they're supposed to keep separate. There was some very incriminating emails for Mark Zuckerberg, who was talking about buying Instagram as a land grab and that they wanted to neutralize those are words that monopolists use. So that's a different issue, sucking up all the innovation, hurting Snapchat just because they can, copying their ideas. And then there's the App Store, which is a lesser problem, but a problem for a lot of developers, which can be fixed through regulation or fines or something. And so it's got to be a multifaceted approach by our government. There's been no legislation by our government whatsoever. So maybe one traffic law for them would be good, would be nice. I would like that.
Red lights, green lights. But yeah, I mean, one of the other things, it wasn't just that Facebook was saying they wanted to swallow up their competition. It was that they were suggesting that if they didn't go along with the deal, they would just create their version of Instagram anyway and basically squash them by copying them, right? Which is an incredible anti-competitive act, no?
Sure, but you know what? Good luck, because they're the most non-innovative people on the planet. Like, good luck. They've tried lots of dating. What happened to their dating service? What happened to their video service? What happened to they're not very good at creating new things. They're good at buying them. And I think Instagram, which was created by Kevin Systrom and Mike Krieger, is a wonderful service, but it was created by Kevin Systrom and Mike Krieger and not Mark Zuckerberg. And so what he's really good at is copying. And I think that has a limit, just like it did with Microsoft. Microsoft couldn't play that game for that long. It ends.
Right. I mean, isn't the argument basically against this Facebook pitch, like, we need a giant behemoth, basically utility version of a social media giant. Sure. Otherwise, China will eat our lunch, when actually, it seems to me, our advantage has been born of the ability of people to innovate in the space.
Yeah, but if he wants to be a utility, let's regulate him like a utility then. Oh, great. That sounds good too. Like, either way, you either get regulated as if you're a utility or you allow innovation to flourish. I think the reason we beat China and we're ahead in every way is because of innovation, because of small startups, because of their fear that they're not going to, if they go into social media or search or e-commerce, they're not going to get crushed. And, small businesses get crushed in this environment. And no matter how you slice it, we have two companies making phones. We have one company doing social media. We have one company excelling in e-commerce, as much as they say there's lots of competitors. Amazon dominates. We have one company that does search. And by the way, in this pandemic, did you notice their results? Everybody else is like gripping with their fingernails before they fall into the abyss. Not these companies. These companies are flying high and their stocks are flying high. They've never been richer as people. They've never been richer as companies. They have advantages in the pandemic. Amazon does, Google does, all of them.
Yeah, I mean, it does seem as though, I think one thing people have remarked on is that the pandemic has accelerated a number of processes, right? It's accelerated some problems, really serious long-term problems for brick and mortar stores, but it's also accelerated the growth of these sort of digital platforms. what happens now? So we had this hearing. It was a pretty substantive hearing. There were actually some really interesting revelations. Not the usual, not as many questions as you. A couple.
There was a couple of anti-Americanism, talking to the only person of color, Sundar Pichai. That was interesting, calling him anti-American. Jim Jordan going down the alleyway of conservative bias, that stuff. But otherwise, it was good.
I would say, though, there was fewer questions that presume things like the internet is made of pipes and my grandkids set up my email stuff.
There was a
couple. But we're always going to have to accept some of that. That's the price of doing business with a bunch of right-wing zealots and septuagenarians. But what happens now? So we had this big hearing. There seems to be at least some kind of beginnings of a consensus that says, hold on a second, these companies have way too much power. They are incredibly powerful entities. It seems like what happens next is we have to now do what you were saying, is go at the problems individually, right? Not treat this like a behemoth. What happens on Amazon, right? Right now we have Amazon. It is this incredibly sophisticated algorithm. It is able to sell stuff through its own shelves, right? That's very different than what a supermarket would do, right? A supermarket doesn't run up to you as you're heading to your car and says, "Get this, get this version of it. It's better." And they don't hide Coca-Cola behind 4 or 5 rows of Amazon brand soda. But so what happens next with Amazon?
Or price it below. Right. That's what they tend to do. I think they should separate the marketplace from things they sell. I just think, and make sure that data is in a lockbox of other sellers. They are the marketplace in commerce. They'll argue they're not, but they really are. And delivery, they're so good. And people like them so much in terms of the result. They're forgetting, just like getting in an Uber and it costs $4. It doesn't cost $4. It's not that price. They're living off of other people's dimes, essentially. And so I think separating the marketplace from what they sell, and same thing at the App Store. If Apple's going to get in the music business, they don't get to have any say over music pricing, right? You know what I mean? Like that's like you move away. That's a harder problem. But if they're going to get into direct competition in services with people that they also serve, there has to be some sort of a buffer between them so that these groups that are making these decisions are making good economic decisions, not Apple economic decisions or Amazon economic decisions.
Let's talk about Facebook. So, as you mentioned, one of their challenge is distinct around misinformation spreading on their platform. You've interviewed Mark Zuckerberg many times. Did you learn anything from Facebook during this hearing? Did anything surprise you?
No, I thought those emails were exactly what I thought they would be, and I'm sure there's dozens more like it. The idea, instead of talking about innovation, he's talking about land grab. Instead of talking about competing, he's talking about neutralizing. That feels very Bill Gatesian, circa 1997. That's what it feels like to me. If you remember, he was going to crush them. But I had a quote in one of my books in the 90s where Bill Gates said, "We're going to buy you, bury you, or copy you." That's what it felt like. I was like, oh, he's back. You know what I mean? Actually, Bill Gates is great these days. Thank you for the vaccines, Bill Gates, someday. But it feels very monopolistic. So no, I think he did fine. He's been there a couple of times, and he's sort of the one they beat up on. But he sort of escaped. There was no Katie Porter or AOC to. I think there was a lot of. I think Jeff Bezos got more of it from Representative Jayapal, I thought was great. I thought was amazing, from Seattle.
Yeah, she was great. So let's close by talking about TikTok. So I did download it you downloaded it to a burner phone.
Yes, that's over there.
Which I respect. Phone. I did briefly download it to my real phone until, without ever setting up an account, it really did discover that my interests were new ways of making grilled cheese and hot guys.
Well, their algorithm's great. Their algorithm is wonderful. That's an amazing algorithm they've got going. Yes, they know.
So, put TikTok aside.
Yeah.
The growth of this sort of incredibly sophisticated algorithm, whether it's what Facebook is doing, what YouTube is doing, what TikTok is doing, where basically the algorithm is smarter than the people making it. It is smarter than us. It is able to know what we like in very sophisticated ways, in ways we might not understand, right? That actually don't make intuitive sense because it's not drawing on human intuition. It's actually just looking at hard data and hard science. What do you see as the long-term risk of how much of what we see and what we hear is born of these kinds of algorithms, regardless of what happens with these individual corporate entities?
Well, there's a lot of talk around AI lately because OpenAI released some versions of AI that are making people nervous. Everyone's talking about it. I think the question is, how do we abrogate our decision making, or we give it off to these systems? When do we stop doing that? When does human decision making begin, and when does that begin? Now, some of their decision making is good, like it's smarter, it's faster, it's quicker. Most of our decision making is based on anecdotes and bad data. They have good data. The question is what data goes in there, right? What data, crap in, crap out is the way I look at it with data. And so if you have a lot of policing data that show more people of color get arrested, the algorithm's going to think people of color are more criminal, right? Like, why wouldn't that? It would make sense in a lot of ways. That's a simplistic way of doing it, but it's just is a question of, one, regular people are making this AI, they're creating it and then putting in regular data that may be flawed. And then as it becomes ever more sophisticated, how do we know how it comes to conclusions, say about loans or jobs, or whether you can get in the country or not? Like, there's something good about human fallibility, right? Like, so things they can go, oh, I see what happened here. This is whatever.
Yeah.
But the minute they can go, that's what the data says. That's the way it's going to go for you. And so I think that's a stupid way of saying that we're giving over. We're in the middle of the Terminator movie, right before they blow up. That's not the case, but it's just that it creates, and then who controls it? Like, what if China gets really far ahead? What if it's used for facial surveillance? These are questions our Congress of elected officials needs to be talking about, and us as citizens, just like what happened in Portland, where they were taking in all kinds of text data and it's drone data, and it just can go on and on and on. And that's the issue. And it's not just that you like grilled cheese sandwiches, it's so much more. You're so much more complex than grilled cheese sandwiches, John, I think. But
I like French toast.
And it's oh, okay. All right. Well then, but that's delightful, and that's great. And that's, when you're on Netflix and they give you something you like, that's great. The question is, think of the worst. I always say, think of the Black Mirror. I've told you this. Think of the Black Mirror episode on this, and then organize yourself around that, right? What's the Black Mirror episode to the cheese problem? That I don't know what it is, but there is a Black Mirror episode about you and grilled cheese that doesn't end with a delicious sandwich for you.
No, but I like the first act. I think is pretty fun.
Delicious.
Carol, last question. I sent Elon Musk some Bitcoin over Twitter. Do you think I'm going to get that back?
I don't think. I think that was hacked. I don't know if you know that.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. You're not going to get that back. You're not. But Elon, that stock is killing it. Boy, is he doing well. Man, that guy, whatever,
Get him off Twitter. He's better off. He does better off Twitter.
He's still on Twitter. God bless. He landed that spacecraft. Honestly, after the past couple of weeks when everything's going to hell, and he lands that spacecraft with the cool suits, I was like, thank you.
Thank goodness.
It landed and crash on impact. I was like, oh, he did it. Thank God. And
did you see that a bunch of unauthorized boats got too close?
Oh, did they?
Yeah, they didn't cordon off the area enough, so a bunch of people, a bunch of gawkers got up there. It's like a bunch of people in boats being like, "Hey, America used to do stuff like this. Let's go check it out."
Yeah. Probably were they wearing masks? That's all I want to know.
I don't think the boaters wear masks. Kara Swisher.
Thank you.
So good to see you. Thanks for doing this.
Good to see you. All right, thanks.